This is a keyboard I hand soldered. The goal with this keyboard was to go extreme budget to see if I could do that. Basically, the only costs were the microcontroller and the switches and the diodes. So how I did it is I got a HDMI cable and I took out the wires and cut them up and put them in the rows and columns, and then used the rest of the HDMI cable for the connection between the keyboards for the UART. When I built this keyboard, it was pretty good. I liked it a lot. It was comfortable to type on. But then after maybe a few weeks, there were some keys that stopped working. So I had to take out my soldering iron and solder back the connection that got messed up. And then a few weeks later, the same thing happened again. And I did it again, and then eventually I just made sure, like, don't ever move it around or anything. And it still had problems, but I just dealt with them. I just pressed the key multiple times. And then another problem I had was I didn't like the switches I chose anymore. I chose Kale Box Whites. They were really fatiguing to type on for a long time, and I felt like I'd want to just try a new one. Maybe it could help me type faster or something. But the problem with this is you have to solder every key, and so to try a different keycap, you'd have to resolder the whole keyboard, take everything out, unsolder it to the microcontroller, put the keycaps in, resolder everything completely. So I definitely didn't want to do that because when I first soldered it, it took me like a week, doing it every day. I decided I'll just make a different keyboard and set that up. But I still didn't want to do a week of soldering. So I did a lot of researching on what the different options are if you still want to make a dactyl, but you don't want to do all the soldering. So I was thinking about getting like a Kinesis or something, just because I really wouldn't have something that didn't have problems all the time and that I didn't have to solder it to build it. So I was looking at that and I was kind of thinking about it, but it's a lot of money. So I was looking around at if there were like boards that you could use instead of soldering it. And so the one that I thought looked the best after looking at a few different options was this one. And so this one, it has the swap component there, and then it has the diode, it has the RGB LED, and the whole idea is you just plug that into the microcontroller that they also sell. You just plug it into the microcontroller right here, and then you don't even have to solder it to the microcontroller, which is what I think was causing problems before, not just the soldering between the matrix, but soldering all those little wires to the controller, like some of them were touching and stuff. So this looked perfect. So I decided, okay, I want to try this, I want to do it, because this keyboard, I'm getting tired of it. And with this, I could experiment with different keycaps if I wanted to try a new one. So I decided, okay, I'll get it. But it was sold out when I decided to get it. So I waited a few days and checked, and it's still sold out. So I emailed the email that was showing on this website, and I asked him when would it be in stock, and he said around the end of the month. This was like February. And then I waited, and then it wasn't. Then I asked him again. He said, okay, around the end of March. And then I waited, and it wasn't in stock. So then I just stopped emailing him, and kept looking every few days. And eventually, like around the beginning of May, it was in stock. I don't know if it did come in stock for like really small periods of time when I missed it for a day or something. And so I don't know if it was coming in stock and then it went out of stock in like a day and I missed it. So if you decide to go this route, you might have to wait a few months. But actually this one is in stock now. I think this is a new thing, like just recent, if you want to use the chalk switches. So you could try that. So, but then there's the question, where do you get the STL of the keyboard to print it out to where these will fit in there? So what you do is you go to this website and you can set which PCB you're using, which would be this one. And you set which keycaps you're going to use, which you can change all the everything. You can move keys around, you can add keys, change all the settings, and then it generates the keyboard. You download it, print it, and so this was the one that I configured. This website also has a hand scanning feature where it'll scan your hand with the camera and it'll put the keys in the right place to where it perfectly matches your hand. And so I did the hand scanning, I set up everything how I wanted it, thought of where I wanted each key in the thumb cluster to be. So I printed out one side and I made sure the board fit and everything, this board that I got. And it wasn't quite fitting in all the keys, especially the thumb cluster. The way I was putting it on was like this part is all connected and then these are all separate lines. I was putting the connected part here and separate lines like that. That's like the opposite of what you want to do, because these are all the far apart ones. You don't want to have the parts of the board that have to be close together all over here. You want it to be over here where it's simpler to put them in. But you can't just flip around the board like that with the current keyboard I made. And so if you look here, this is how the board goes in. If you flip this around, then that flips everything around, and then you can put this side of the board over here. And I printed that out. It fit really well, and you put all the switches in and then you put the board onto each switch. And so with this, it's not a real hot swap. You put in the switches and then put the board on that, and then if you wanted to change the switches, you would take the board off, change the switches, and then put the board back on. And then I just put the keycaps from my old keyboard onto the new one, and this was the keyboard I was trying to do that was really budget. And so these keycaps, I actually 3D printed them, and that worked really well. So now I had the keyboard set up, now I had to figure out the firmware. Thankfully, this microcontroller is just a regular RP2040, just a regular Pi Pico chip that's in there, so it just works like a Pi Pico. But then the problem is you didn't set up which pins go where, so you don't know how to set that up in the firmware, because that just goes into the connector. So what you do is on this website, when you have it configured, you go to program and then you download this PMK, and then you download the one that's for yours. You flash that on your firmware, and then your keys just output the coordinates of where they're on the board, and then that gets read by this website. On your keyboard, first you press this key and then this key and this key, and then that sets up where the board is to where it should be logically. So then once you do all the keys, then there will be a auto-generated firmware that you can download. And so you just flash that onto your keyboard, and then that actually worked for me. But then you don't have all the layers and stuff that you want, and like the thumbs and stuff aren't filled out, they're just spaced when you press them. So then from that file, it's a QMK project. So then I used quad code, and I gave it my old KMK firmware for my old keyboard and told it put all of these layers and everything. They're like one step at a time, like set up the first layer to be perfect, and then set up the rest of the layers, and then set up the RGB how I want it. And each time I compile it and flash it. But then when you're compiling it, it's pretty difficult to set up to compile on your computer. So what you have to do is you have to take the downloaded project that you get, upload it to your GitHub, and then every time you push to GitHub Actions will automatically compile it because there's a configuration in the project that you download, and then it goes into releases that you download that. So GitHub compiles it for you. So that worked really well. I got it eventually set up. The board actually has the RGB LEDs in there, and normally with hand soldering that would be super difficult to solder all that in, but these it's already in there. And so here's a picture of how it looks. The RGB does go super bright if you want it to. So here's some different pictures of that. I'm also printing these out, these white ones, and so you could see the labels when the lights are on. And so yeah, this is just so much better than soldering a keyboard. I wouldn't ever recommend soldering a keyboard if you're willing to wait like a month or two if the board isn't in stock. And the price isn't even that much worse, because if you're hand soldering it, you still have to buy the wires, the diodes, the solder, and so that's going to cost like somewhere around like $20 for everything. And this is like $20 per side. Or you could go the route of doing the ultra budget where you don't buy the good wires. You just take it out of the HDMI cable, but I definitely wouldn't recommend that. It took so long to take all those wires out of the HDMI cable and strip it because they were super thin. They weren't easy to strip like if you would have bought them here. And they weren't solid core. That was a big problem with them not connecting, I think. And so maybe if I would have done it better, like buying these, then I wouldn't have had these problems that I was having, and maybe it would have been much quicker to solder. But still, this is much better idea. Let me know if you have any questions. Let me know what you're interested in. Thank you.